The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a crossword puzzle I hadn't touched. My name is Walter Holt. I spent 38 years building Holt Plumbing Supply into something real. 2 warehouses, a fleet of trucks, accounts with every major contractor in the greater Denver area. I retired at 64 with enough to live comfortably and enough time to realize I hadn't thought much about what comfortable meant without work filling every hour. That was 2 years ago. Now I did crosswords. Badly. The number on my phone screen was one I didn't recognize. Colorado Springs area code. Mr. Holt. The voice was a man's. Steady but careful, the way people sound when they've rehearsed what they're about to say 3 or 4 times. My name is Philip Garvey. I was the officiant at your son's wedding last September. I set down my pen. Pastor Garvey, of course. I need to speak with you in person, today if possible. And Mr. Holt, please don't mention this call to your son or his wife. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. Outside, a neighbor was mowing. Normal Tuesday sounds. What's this about? I'd rather not say over the phone, but I wouldn't call if I didn't believe you needed to know. From the back of the house, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice carrying through the wall. She was on her phone again, laughing at something. She'd been staying here 3 weeks. Her and my son, both. Temporarily, they said. Just until they got back on their feet after the move. Give me an address, I said. Pastor Garvey's church was 40 minutes south, a modest brick building with a parking lot half full on a Wednesday. He met me at the side entrance, a man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of handshake that tells you someone means what they say. He led me to his office. Bookshelves, a wooden desk, afternoon light coming through Venetian blinds in stripes across the carpet. He closed the door and sat down across from me. Mr. Holt, I've been a pastor for 26 years. I've married a lot of couples, and in all that time, I've never done what I'm about to do. I waited. 3 days before your son's wedding, he said. I received a phone call from a woman named Darlene Quast. She was your daughter-in-law's college roommate. Close friends for years, apparently, until recently. He paused. She told me something I didn't know what to do with. I prayed about it. I consulted a colleague. And in the end, I decided that if I had a father and someone knew what this woman told me, I would want them to say something. He opened his desk drawer and slid a printed document across to me, several pages, stapled. Darlene sent me this after the call. I verified what I could. I picked it up. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. My son had opened a joint savings account with his wife 8 months before the wedding. Not unusual, but the account had been opened with a specific purpose, noted in correspondence Darlene had forwarded. Correspondence between my daughter-in-law and a man named Foster Creel, whom I'd never heard of. The purpose was to consolidate wedding gifts. My son and his wife had sent out wedding invitations with a personal note, not a registry, they'd said. Just cash or checks if people felt moved to give. We're starting fresh. Practical over things. I had thought it was mature, sensible. The correspondence Darlene sent showed something else. My daughter-in-law had calculated, based on the guest list, an expected intake of between $60,000 and $80,000 in gifts. The note attached said, once it clears, we split and I file. He gets the debt. You and I moved to Asheville like we planned. I read that sentence 3 times. Foster Creel. I looked up from the paper. Who is this man? Pastor Garvey's expression didn't change. From what Darlene told me, he's someone your daughter-in-law has been with for approximately 2 years. She and your son met 14 months ago. The math sat there between us like a stone on the table. She was already with someone else when she met my son. That's what Darlene believes, and the timeline in those documents appears to support it. I looked back down at the pages. The account. The expected gift total. He gets the debt. My son had significant student loans. Car payments. He'd been relieved, I remembered him saying, that his wife had good credit. They were going to consolidate everything after the wedding. Get organized. Start fresh. He was going to be left with the debt and an empty account. My son doesn't know any of this, I said. I don't believe so. I stood up. I'm not sure why. Just needed to be standing. Through the window, the parking lot sat quiet in the afternoon sun. An ordinary Wednesday in Colorado Springs. I thought about the wedding. September, beautiful weather. An outdoor ceremony at a vineyard I'd paid $14,000 to rent. The flowers. The catering. The band. I'd written checks for $47,000 in total and considered it money well spent because my son had looked happier than I'd ever seen him. He'd looked happy because he didn't know. Mr. Holt. Pastor Garvey's voice was quiet. I'm sorry. I genuinely don't know what the right thing to do with information like this is. But I couldn't keep it. You did right, I said. You absolutely did right. He handed me a manila envelope. Everything printed, he said. The emails Darlene had forwarded. The account documentation. A timeline she'd written out herself, with dates and details. I drove home on autopilot. I don't remember most of it. I remember getting on the highway, and I remember pulling into my garage and sitting there for a long time with the engine off and the envelope on the passenger seat. When I came inside, my son was at the kitchen table eating a sandwich and watching something on his laptop with headphones in. 29 years old. He had his mother's eyes. She passed 6 years ago, and sometimes looking at him was the closest thing I had left to her. He pulled out one earbud. Hey, Dad, you were gone a while. Errands, I said. From upstairs, music. My daughter-in-law doing whatever she did up there all day. She worked remotely, she said. Flexible hours. My son looked at me a beat longer than usual. You okay? Tired, I said. Going to lie down. I went to my office instead and sat at my desk with the envelope. Read everything again, slower this time. Darlene's timeline was meticulous. Dates of texts she'd seen, a trip she'd taken with my daughter-in-law to visit Foster Creel in Asheville the previous spring. An argument they'd had in October when Darlene said she couldn't be part of it anymore. You're using him. He's a good person and you're using him for a payout. Her account of what my daughter-in-law had said in response was short. Everyone uses everyone. At least I'm honest about it. Darlene had saved the text exchange. It was there in the printed pages, time-stamped. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing, not because I knew what I was going to do yet, just because I needed to see it on paper. Numbers. Dates. Facts. The wedding guests had been mostly my side of the family, my business contacts, people who'd known my son since he was a boy. My former partner, Lou Sinclair, had handed my son a check at the reception with both hands, the way you do when something matters. $25,000. Welcome to the next chapter, son. Lou wasn't a man who threw money around. I circled that number on my pad. Cash gifts I'd witnessed. Checks I'd seen go into the box on the gift table. My daughter-in-law had managed that table herself with 2 of her friends. She'd been so organized about it, so warm with every guest. By midnight, I had 3 pages of notes and no sleep coming. At 7 the next morning, before either of them was up, I was in my truck driving to Denver. I needed to talk to someone who handled things like this, someone who wasn't my son. Ronald Ashby had been my business attorney for 19 years. He was waiting in his office when I arrived, coffee already poured, because that was the kind of man he was. I put the envelope on his desk and told him everything. He read without speaking. When he finished, he set the pages down and leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Walter, he said, this is fraud. I know. If her intent from the start was to enter this marriage with a planned exit designed to take the joint assets, and this documentation suggests that, that's wire fraud if those checks went through banking systems, which they did. He tapped the papers. The question is, what your son wants to do about it. It's his marriage. I know that too. But you're here asking about your exposure first. I nodded. The $47,000 you spent on the wedding, that's a gift. Gone. You can't recover it through litigation without your son's involvement, and even then it's messy. He paused. But the future, your estate, if this marriage continues even briefly and they divorce in Arizona, wrong Colorado, she could have claims on assets depending on what's commingled. And if your son is buried in joint debt when she exits, I need to protect what I have, I said. And I need to help him without him knowing yet. Not until I understand the full picture. Ashby picked up his pen. Tell me about your estate structure. We talked for 2 hours. By the end, I had a plan in motion. Ashby would begin restructuring my estate documents. Nothing dramatic, just making sure that what I intended to leave my son came to him in a form that couldn't be intercepted by a spouse in a fraudulent marriage. A trust, properly constructed, with distributions tied to conditions that protected him, rather than whoever happened to be standing next to him. This protects him, Ashby said, not from her directly, but it makes sure that whatever you leave him, he actually gets. I signed the preliminary documents and drove home. My daughter-in-law was in my kitchen when I got back. She'd made herself coffee and was standing at the counter scrolling her phone. She looked up and smiled. There he is. We were wondering where you snuck off to. 31 years old. Pretty in the way that requires effort. She'd never once offered to pay for groceries. Morning errands, I said. Dad. My son appeared from the hallway, car keys in his hand. I'm gonna pick up a few things. You need anything? I'm fine. After he left, she set down her phone. Looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He worries about you, you know. Being alone out here. I'm not alone, I said. I have company. She smiled again and went back to her phone. That evening, I heard them in the guest room. Not the conversation, just the tone. Something low and tense. My son's voice asking something, her voice answering, flat and final. Then quiet. I'd been a father long enough to know what a conversation going wrong sounds like, even through walls. The next morning, my son knocked on my office door before I'd had coffee. Dad. He sat down across from me. He had dark circles under his eyes. Can I talk to you about something? I waited. Something's off. He rubbed the back of his neck. I know that sounds vague. But lately I don't know, she's been pulling money from the joint account. Small amounts. Said it was for expenses. But I checked last night, and there's been 9 transfers in the past 6 weeks, totaling around $8,000. I kept my face still. I asked her about it, he said. She said I was being paranoid, controlling. That I was treating her like a child. He looked at the desk. Maybe I am. I don't know. We've only been married 7 months. 7 months. The timeline in Darlene's documents placed my daughter-in-law's last verified contact with Foster Creel at 5 months ago. They weren't done. They were mid-operation. Is something wrong with the marriage? I asked, carefully. He was quiet for a long time. I think she might be unhappy. I don't know why. I thought things were good. But in the last few months, she's distant. Like she's here but not here. I thought about what Ashby had said. It's his marriage. It was. But he was walking toward a cliff in the dark, and I was the only person in the room with a flashlight. I need to show you something, I said, and I need you to stay calm when I do. I got the envelope from my locked desk drawer, set it on the table between us. I watched my son's face as he read. It didn't crumble. That was the thing that got me. He was too controlled about it, too still, in the way that means someone has already been building a wall against something they half expected. He read the whole thing without speaking. When he finished, he set the pages down and looked at the window. Darlene sent this to a pastor, he said finally. She didn't know who else to tell. How long have you had this? 3 days. He nodded slowly, didn't ask why I waited. I think he understood. Dad. His voice was level. How much of the wedding did you pay for? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. $47,000, I said, and I'd pay it again if it had been real. He put his face in his hands, not crying. Just not ready to be looked at for a minute. I let him have that. When he lifted his head, his eyes were dry and very clear. What do I do? That's your decision, but I want you to talk to a lawyer before you do anything, before you say a word to her. He looked at me. You've already talked to yours. Yesterday. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. You were already 3 steps ahead. I'm your father, I said. That's the job. He called in sick to work. We spent the morning at Ashby's office, my son and me sitting on the same side of the desk for the first time since he was a teenager, and I was navigating a supplier dispute. Ashby laid it out clearly. The documentation was strong, the fraud angle was viable, and my son's best move was to consult a family attorney immediately about the marriage itself. What he chose to do, confront her, separate, pursue legal action, was his to decide, but he needed to stop any further transfers from the joint account today. My son froze her access to the joint account from his phone in the parking garage on the way out. His hands were steady. He was quiet the whole drive home. She noticed within the hour. I was in my office when I heard her voice change pitch in the kitchen. Then my son's voice, calm and flat. Then a door. I didn't go out. What followed over the next 2 weeks was the kind of thing no father wants to watch his child go through. She cycled through every approach, the wounded confusion, the righteous anger, the tearful apology that swerved at the last moment into accusation. One evening, she came to my office door, which I'd started keeping closed. Walter. She never called me Dad. I'd noticed that before, but hadn't thought about what it meant. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I'd really like to talk to you. There's nothing to discuss, I said. I know you think, whatever he told you. I think, I said, that you should speak to your own attorney. She stared at me for a moment. Something shifted behind her expression. The warmth dropped away completely. Just for a second. The way a mask slips when the person wearing it forgets you're watching. You don't know the whole story, she said. I know enough. She left. I heard her upstairs a few minutes later, phone to her ear, voice low. My son served her with separation papers 11 days after our meeting in my office. His attorney had moved quickly. There were fraud implications that her attorney would have to navigate carefully, which meant she had less leverage than she'd planned on. The gift money, the $60,000 that had flowed into the joint account and from which she'd already moved $8,000, was now subject to legal scrutiny. She moved out on a Friday, 2 suitcases. Her friend picked her up. She didn't say goodbye to me. My son stood in the doorway watching her car pull away. I stood next to him. I keep thinking, he said, about Lou's check. I know. $25,000. The man practically raised me on the Little League sidelines. He shook his head. She put it in a spreadsheet. The people at our wedding. What they were worth. There was nothing useful I could say to that. I just stood next to him. He stayed with me for 3 more weeks after she left. Different than before. He helped with groceries, fixed the gate latch I'd been ignoring for a year, sat with me some evenings watching the game without either of us needing to talk. The house felt like mine again. One morning at breakfast, he looked up from his coffee. Dad, I never asked you what this cost you. The legal stuff. The estate restructuring. Doesn't matter. It does. Consider it the rest of your college tuition, I said. Late installment. He laughed. First real one I'd heard from him in weeks. He moved into his own apartment at the end of the month. Smaller than what they'd had together, but his. His name on the lease. His choices on the walls. He called me the first night he slept there, around 9 o'clock. Quiet, he said. Good quiet, or bad quiet. He thought about it. Good, I think. Still getting used to it. That's how it starts, I said. Ashby called me 2 weeks after that. The fraud case was progressing. My daughter-in-law's attorney had made inquiries about settlement. She wanted to avoid the fraud exposure, which meant returning the transferred funds and accepting significantly less from the marital assets than she planned. My son's attorney was negotiating. It wasn't over, but the math had shifted entirely in his favor. And then there was a call I didn't expect. Darlene Quace called me directly. She got my number from Pastor Garvey, she said, and she hoped that was all right. It's more than all right, I said. I've been wanting to thank you. I wasn't sure I did the right thing. Her voice was tired in the way of someone who'd been carrying something heavy. She was my friend for 9 years. I thought I knew her. You did the right thing, I said, without question. A pause. How is he, your son? He's okay, I said. He's gonna be okay. I'm glad. Another pause. I liked him. The few times I met him, he seemed like a genuinely good person. He is, I said. He got that from his mother. She laughed softly. Well, I'm glad someone spoke up. I almost didn't. I know. I'm grateful you did. After we hung up, I sat on my back porch for a while. The Rocky Mountain foothills sat to the west, going purple in the evening light the way they do in late spring. I'd lived in this house for 21 years. Raised my son in this house for 21 years. Raised my son in this house. Said goodbye to my wife in this house. I thought about what could have happened if Darlene had stayed quiet. My son systematically drained. The debt, the divorce, the shell shock of realizing months or years later what had actually occurred. I'd seen it happen to other men, good men who trusted the wrong person and spent years rebuilding. He wouldn't have to do that, not if I could help it. My phone buzzed. Text from my son. Went to Lou's for dinner tonight. He sends his regards. I smiled and set the phone down. The trust documents were finalized the following week. Ashby walked me through the last signatures, explained the structure one more time. Whatever I'd built, the business proceeds, the investments, the house eventually would pass to my son in a form designed to protect it, not from him. For him, against whatever the world decided to throw at him next. You've done everything right, Ashby said as I signed the last page. I'm a father, I said. I'm just doing the job. On the drive home, I stopped at the hardware store. Old habit, I'd been in the business long enough that I still found hardware stores calming, and wandered the aisles for 20 minutes buying things I didn't urgently need. Sandpaper. A new level. Some weather stripping for the back door that had been letting in drafts all winter. Small, useful things. The satisfaction of problems you can actually fix. My son called that evening while I was eating dinner. Hey, Dad. Hey. I signed the lease renewal today, 12 more months. Good. And He paused. I just wanted to say thank you for the other thing, for not waiting, for being the kind of father who, he stopped. Started again. A lot of dads would have stayed out of it. A lot of dads aren't your dad, I said. He laughed. We talked for another half hour about nothing important, a project at work, a hike he was planning with some friends, whether I needed anything done around the house before summer. Normal things. The kind of conversation that only feels ordinary until you've come close to losing it. After we hung up, I washed my dinner plate and dried it and put it away, and then I stood at my kitchen window for a while looking out at the yard. The grass needed cutting. The garden bed along the fence had come back, the way it does every May, without anyone asking it to. Darlene had almost stayed quiet. Pastor Garvey had almost decided it wasn't his place. I had almost not answered an unknown number on a Wednesday morning. Everything that happened after came down to those 3 moments, 3 people deciding to speak instead of stay silent. I thought about my wife sometimes, in moments like this. What she would have done. She'd always been quicker than me. Faster to see people clearly, faster to act on what she saw. She would have had the papers in front of my son a day earlier at least. But she wasn't here, so I'd had to learn to be fast enough on my own. The evening settled around the house. Quiet, the way I'd gotten used to. Not lonely, just still. My own stillness. Nobody else's chaos filling it up. I was due to call Lou Sinclair back tomorrow. Check on him, let him know how things stood. He deserved that. He trusted my son with $25,000 without hesitating, and that kind of trust deserved to be honored with honesty. I turned off the kitchen light and went to sit on the back porch one more time before bed. The mountains were gone in the dark, but I knew they were there. Some things you can count on, you just have to know which ones. I think about Darlene a lot. Not because what she did was dramatic. It wasn't, really. She made a phone call. She sent some documents. She told the truth to a stranger and then waited to see if it mattered. That's all. But that one act of basic decency, of choosing honesty over comfort, set everything else in motion. Without her, none of it would have happened the way it did. My son would have walked into that marriage not knowing. He would have come out the other side, broke and hollowed out in a way that takes years to recover from. So when I think about what actually saved him, it wasn't me. It was a woman with enough character to do the right thing, even when it cost her a 9-year friendship. I spent a long time thinking I'd failed somewhere as a father. That's the thing nobody tells you about a situation like this. Even when your child is the victim, you still circle back to what you might have done differently. Should I have asked harder questions when they got engaged so fast? Should I have noticed something in the way she talked about money? Maybe. Probably. But I've made peace with the fact that people who are running a deliberate scheme are counting on good faith people to miss the signs. My son is a trusting person. I raised him to be. That's not a flaw I want to correct in him. What I learned, watching all this unfold, is that clear-headed thinking in a crisis is its own kind of courage. When Pastor Garvey put those documents in front of me, everything in me wanted to react. To call my son, right then. To drive home and say something I couldn't unsay. I didn't. I sat with it for a day. I talked to Ashby. I made sure I understood what I was holding before I used it. That discipline, the ability to think straight when the ground is moving under your feet, is something I'd built over 40 years of running a business. Every hard decision I'd ever made, every supplier dispute and rough quarter and difficult employee had been practice for that moment in my kitchen. Deciding how to tell my son his marriage was not what he thought it was. And then there's the matter of staying in the fight once you've started. After Ashby filed the initial documents, after she was served, there were weeks of pressure. Calls, manipulation, one attempt to get me to sit down and talk it through, and all of it was designed to make me feel like the unreasonable one, like I was tearing apart a family over a misunderstanding. I wasn't. I knew what I'd read. I held the line, not because I'm a hard man, but because I knew that giving an inch at that point would cost my son everything. What I tell any parent watching is this: pay attention to the quiet things, the small assumptions. The way someone talks about your money like it's already partly theirs. The discomfort you feel but explain away. Those feelings are data. Treat them that way. My son is okay. More than okay, actually. He's clearer now than he was before. More careful. More his own person. That's what surviving something like this does when you come through it with your integrity intact. It doesn't harden you. It clarifies you. I still got the mountains outside my window every morning. Still got Lou Sinclair's number in my phone. Still got a son who calls me on a Tuesday night just to talk. That's everything.